Dr. Sarah Mitchell had always believed that medicine was about more than just following protocols. On that rainy Thursday evening in October, her belief would be tested in ways she never imagined. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital was unusually quiet, with only the steady hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment breaking the silence. Sarah had been working the night shift for 3 years now, ever since her divorce finalized, and she needed the extra income to support her 2 children. At 38, she was considered one of the most skilled emergency physicians in the city, known for her quick thinking and unwavering dedication to her patients. Her colleagues respected her judgment, and her superiors trusted her completely. But tonight would challenge everything she thought she knew about practicing medicine. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. A motorcycle accident on Highway 95, just outside the city limits. The paramedics reported a single victim, male, approximately 30 years old, with severe trauma and possible internal bleeding. What they didn't mention over the radio was the leather jacket covered in patches that marked him as a member of the Iron Wolves, one of the most notorious motorcycle clubs in the state. When the ambulance doors burst open and the paramedics rushed in with their patient, Sarah's first thought was purely medical. The man on the gurney was unconscious, his face swollen and bloodied, his breathing shallow and labored. His vital signs were unstable, and she could see immediately that he was in critical condition. The motorcycle had collided with a guardrail at high speed, and the impact had caused massive internal trauma. "What do we have?" Sarah asked, snapping on her gloves as she moved alongside the gurney. Jake Morrison, 32 years old, the lead paramedic, reported breathlessly. Found at the scene of a single-vehicle motorcycle accident. Possible internal bleeding, suspected punctured lung, multiple fractures. Blood pressure dropping fast. As they wheeled him into Trauma Bay 3, Sarah noticed the distinctive patches on his torn leather jacket. The Iron Wolves logo was unmistakable, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Everyone in the city knew about the Iron Wolves. They were involved in drug trafficking, illegal weapons, and had been linked to several violent crimes over the past few years. The police were constantly trying to build cases against them, and tensions between law enforcement and the club had reached dangerous levels. But, as Sarah looked at the injured man before her, all she saw was a patient who desperately needed her help. His skin was pale and clammy, his lips had a bluish tint that indicated oxygen deprivation, and his pulse was weak and rapid. Every instinct she had as a doctor told her that time was running out. The nursing staff worked efficiently around her, cutting away his clothing and connecting monitors. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, punctuated by the whoosh of the ventilator they had connected to help him breathe. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision as she examined him, her mind racing through possible diagnoses and treatment options. "We need to get him to surgery immediately," she announced after her initial assessment. "Looks like a ruptured spleen and possible liver laceration. Call the surgical team and prep or two." It was then that Detective Ray Coleman walked into the trauma bay. Sarah had worked with Ray on several cases involving criminal activity, and she knew him to be a fair but determined police officer. His presence tonight, however, felt different. There was a tension in his shoulders and a hardness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "Doc, we need to talk," Ray said, his voice low and urgent. Sarah continued working on her patient, checking his pupils for signs of head trauma and ordering blood work. "Can it wait? This man is critical." "That's Jake Morrison," Ray said, stepping closer. "He's a high-ranking member of the Iron Wolves. We've been trying to get evidence against him for 2 years. He's suspected of being involved in the murder of police officer David Torres last month." Sarah's hands paused for just a moment before resuming their work. Officer Torres had been a young patrol officer, just 25 years old, with a wife and newborn baby. His death had shaken the entire community and had made the relationship between police and the Iron Wolves even more volatile. "I understand who he is," Sarah said carefully, "but right now he's my patient, and he's dying." Ray moved to block her path as she reached for additional medical supplies. "Sarah, you don't understand. If this guy survives, he could walk free on the Torres case. We're close to getting enough evidence to put him away for life, but if he's in a coma or has brain damage from this accident, he might never face justice. The implications of what Ray was suggesting hung heavy in the air. Sarah looked at him with a mixture of shock and disappointment. She had known Ray for 5 years, had trusted him, had even considered him a friend. But what he was implying went against everything she believed in as a doctor. "Are you asking me to let him die?" she asked quietly. "I'm asking you to consider the bigger picture," Ray replied. "This man has caused immeasurable pain to families in this community. Officer Torres will never see his daughter grow up because of people like Morrison. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices." Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Around the trauma bay, the nursing staff continued their work, but she could sense their awareness of the conversation taking place. Some of them had family members in law enforcement. Others had lost friends to drug-related violence that the Iron Wolves were believed to be behind. Jake Morrison's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His blood pressure had dropped even further, and the monitors showed signs of increasing internal bleeding. Without immediate surgery, he would almost certainly die within the hour. Sarah knew that she was one of the few surgeons on staff capable of handling such a complex case under these time constraints. "Dr. Mitchell," Nurse Jennifer Walsh called out urgently, his pressures dropping to 60/40. "We're losing him." Sarah looked at the unconscious man before her, then at Detective Coleman, who was watching her intently. The choice before her was clear, and yet it felt impossibly complex. As a doctor, she had taken an oath to do no harm, to save lives regardless of who the patient was or what they might have done. But, as a citizen of the community, she understood the pain that the Iron Wolves had caused. She thought about Officer Torres, about his young widow who had spoken at his funeral about wanting justice for her husband's death. She thought about the other victims of violence in the city, about the families torn apart by the drugs that flowed through the Iron Wolves network. She also thought about her own children, sleeping safely at home because there were police officers like David Torres willing to put their lives on the line to protect them. But then, she looked again at Jake Morrison's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, and she saw not a criminal but a human being whose life hung in the balance. She saw someone's son, possibly someone's brother or father. She realized that if she let him die, she would become something she never wanted to be, a judge and executioner rather than a healer. The trauma bay fell silent except for the urgent beeping of the monitors. Sarah was aware that everyone was waiting for her decision, that word of this moment would likely spread throughout the hospital and beyond. She knew that whatever choice she made would define not only Jake Morrison's fate but her own integrity as a physician. Detective Coleman stepped closer. "Sarah, think about what's best for everyone. Think about justice for Officer Torres." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her oath as a doctor, the expectations of her community, and the moral complexity of the situation. When she opened them, her voice was steady and clear. "Get him to immediately," she commanded. "Call Dr. Henderson and tell him we have a critical case coming up. And someone notify the blood bank, we're going to need several units." The nursing staff sprang into action, preparing to move Morrison to the operating room. Detective Coleman stared at Sarah with a mixture of disappointment and respect. "I hope you can live with this decision," he said quietly. "I can live with saving a life," Sarah replied, moving alongside the gurney as they wheeled Morrison toward the elevator. "What I couldn't live with is letting someone die because of who they are rather than providing the medical care they need." As the elevator doors closed and they ascended toward the surgical floor, Sarah felt a mixture of certainty and apprehension. She knew she had made the right choice according to her medical ethics, but she also understood that the consequences of her decision would extend far beyond the operating room. The surgery would be long and complex, requiring all of her skill and experience. But, as she scrubbed in and prepared to fight for Jake Morrison's life, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger and more complicated story. The operating room was bathed in harsh white light as Dr. Sarah Mitchell made her first incision. Jake Morrison lay before her, his body broken and fighting for survival. The surgery would be one of the most challenging of her career, requiring her to repair a ruptured spleen, stop internal bleeding, and address multiple fractures while keeping him stable enough to survive the procedures. Dr. Richard Henderson, the chief of surgery, had arrived within minutes of Sarah's call. A man in his 60s with silver hair and steady hands, Henderson had seen everything in his 30-year career. As he worked alongside Sarah, removing damaged tissue and repairing torn blood vessels, he occasionally glanced at her with curiosity. Word had already begun to spread through the hospital about the patient's identity and the circumstances surrounding Sarah's decision to operate. "Blood pressure stabilizing," announced the anesthesiologist, Dr. Kim Park. "Heart rate coming down to acceptable levels." Sarah felt a small measure of relief as she continued working. The surgery was proceeding better than she had initially hoped. Morrison's injuries were severe, but they were not beyond repair. Her hands moved with practiced precision, suturing torn organs and addressing each problem methodically. 3 hours into the surgery, a commotion outside the operating room caught everyone's attention. Through the observation window, they could see several police officers gathered in the hallway, along with hospital security. Detective Coleman was among them, speaking animatedly with hospital administrator Robert Chen. "Looks like we have an audience," Dr. Henderson murmured, not looking up from his work. Sarah tried to focus on the surgery, but the presence of law enforcement outside was unsettling. She knew that Morrison's survival had implications beyond the medical, but she hadn't expected such an immediate response. The fact that so many officers had gathered suggested that something significant was happening. As if reading her thoughts, Nurse Walsh leaned closer. "Dr. Mitchell, Administrator Chen asked me to tell you that there are media vans gathering outside the hospital. Word about the patient's identity has leaked." Sarah's stomach tightened. The last thing she wanted was media attention, especially given the controversial nature of her decision. She could already imagine the headlines and the questions that would follow. The community was still grieving Officer Torres, and emotions were running high. Her choice to save Morrison's life would not be universally supported. "Let's just focus on finishing this surgery," Sarah said firmly. "Everything else can wait." But even as she spoke, she could see more people gathering in the hallway. Hospital staff were whispering in small groups, and she noticed several nurses and technicians she didn't recognize peering through the observation window. News traveled fast in a hospital, and clearly the entire facility was now aware of the situation. The surgery continued for 2 more hours. Morrison's spleen had to be removed entirely, and repairing the liver damage required delicate work to avoid compromising the organ's function. Throughout the procedure, his vital signs remained stable, and Sarah began to feel cautiously optimistic about his chances of survival. "Excellent work, Dr. Mitchell," Henderson said as they completed the final sutures. "This was textbook emergency surgery under extreme pressure. Your technique was flawless." Sarah appreciated the praise, but she knew that the real challenges were just beginning. Morrison would need intensive care for several days, possibly weeks, and his recovery would be closely watched by both medical staff and law enforcement. The political implications of her decision were becoming more apparent by the hour. As they wheeled Morrison to the intensive care unit, Sarah was surprised to see the crowd that had gathered in the hallway. Hospital staff, police officers, and even some people she didn't recognize were watching as they passed. The atmosphere was tense, with whispered conversations and pointed looks following them down the corridor. In the ICU, Morrison was connected to multiple monitors and life support equipment. He remained unconscious, his body focusing all its energy on healing from the trauma. Sarah reviewed his charts and spoke with the nursing staff about his care plan, emphasizing the importance of monitoring for any signs of complications. "Dr. Mitchell," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see Administrator Chen approaching with a serious expression. "We need to talk privately." They walked to Chen's office, where Sarah was surprised to find Detective Coleman waiting along with 2 other men she didn't recognize. Chen introduced them as FBI agent Marcus Torres, the brother of the slain police officer, and District Attorney William Hayes. The presence of these officials made it clear that Morrison's case had implications far beyond the hospital walls. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease as she realized how many people had a stake in the outcome of her patient's recovery. "Dr. Mitchell," Agent Torres began, his voice tight with emotion, "I want you to understand what you've done. Jake Morrison is believed to be directly responsible for my brother's death. David was investigating the Iron Wolves when he was gunned down in cold blood. Morrison was seen leaving the area where my brother was killed. Sarah felt the weight of his words, seeing the pain in Torres's eyes. She could only imagine the agony of losing a brother to violence and, then, seeing the suspected killer receive life-saving medical care. "I understand your loss," Sarah said carefully, "and I'm deeply sorry for what happened to your brother. But, as a doctor, I can't make treatment decisions based on what a patient might have done. My obligation is to preserve life." District Attorney Hayes leaned forward in his chair. "Dr. Mitchell, we're not asking you to compromise your medical ethics. But, you should know that Morrison's recovery could significantly impact our ability to prosecute this case. We have evidence, but much of it depends on witness testimony. If Morrison dies, certain testimonies become admissible that wouldn't be otherwise." The legal implications were becoming clearer, and Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. She had made her decision based on medical ethics, but these officials were asking her to consider factors that had nothing to do with patient care. Administrator Chen cleared his throat. "Sarah, I need you to understand the position this puts the hospital in. We're already receiving calls from city council members, community leaders, and media outlets. There's significant public interest in this case, and not all of it is supportive of the decision to operate." Sarah stood up, feeling a surge of anger. "Are you asking me to second-guess a medical decision that saved someone's life? Because if you are, I need to remind everyone in this room that I took an oath to do no harm. That oath doesn't include exceptions for people we don't like." Agent Torres's face flushed red. "My brother took an oath too, to serve and protect this community. Morrison and his gang have made a mockery of that oath with their violence and criminal activity. How many more officers have to die before we stop protecting people like him?" The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Sarah understood the emotional weight of the situation, but she also knew that compromising her medical principles would set a dangerous precedent. "I'm going to check on my patient," Sarah announced, moving toward the door. "His recovery is my primary concern right now." As she left the office, she could hear heated discussions continuing behind her. The political and legal implications of Morrison's survival were clearly complex, involving multiple law enforcement agencies and community stakeholders. But Sarah knew that her responsibility remained focused on patient care, regardless of external pressures. Back in the ICU, Morrison remained unconscious but stable. His body was responding well to treatment, and the surgical repairs appeared to be holding. Sarah reviewed his medications and consulted with the nursing staff about his progress. "Doctor," Nurse Walsh said quietly, "there are reporters outside the hospital asking for statements about the patient. Security is keeping them away from the ICU, but they're persistent." Sarah nodded, having expected media attention. Morrison's identity and the circumstances of his treatment would inevitably become public knowledge, especially given the community's interest in anything related to the Iron Wolves. As she completed her rounds and prepared to go home, Sarah reflected on the events of the night. She had made a decision that she believed was ethically correct, but she was beginning to understand that the consequences would extend far beyond the hospital. The survival of one patient had become a flashpoint for larger issues of justice, community safety, and the role of medical professionals in complex situations. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her ex-husband. "Saw the news. Kids are asking questions. Call when you can." Sarah realized that even her personal life would be affected by her professional decision. Her children would inevitably hear about the case at school, and she would need to explain to them why their mother had chosen to save the life of someone many people in the community viewed as a criminal. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Sarah noticed increased police patrols and a general sense of tension in the air. The Iron Wolves case had heightened security concerns throughout the city, and Morrison's hospitalization would likely increase those tensions further. At home, she found her children sleeping peacefully, unaware of the controversy surrounding their mother's work. Sarah sat in her kitchen, drinking a cup of tea and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. She had saved a life, but in doing so, she had become entangled in a web of legal, political, and social complications that she was only beginning to understand. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was Dr. Henderson. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that I support your decision completely," he said. "What you did tonight was what any good doctor would do. Don't let the politics get to you." "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot coming from you." "There's something else," Henderson continued. "I've been getting calls from medical colleagues around the state. Word is spreading about this case, and there's significant interest from medical ethicists and professional organizations. Your decision is being seen as an important precedent." Sarah hadn't considered the broader medical implications of her choice. The idea that her decision might influence how other doctors handle similar situations was both reassuring and daunting. After hanging up, she tried to sleep but found her mind racing with questions about what would happen next. Morrison's recovery would be closely monitored not just medically, but legally and politically. Every decision about his care would be scrutinized, and she would be at the center of ongoing controversy. But, despite the complications and pressures, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she held on to the knowledge that she had remained true to her principles as a physician, even when doing so came with significant personal and professional costs. The intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital had become the center of unprecedented attention. 3 days after Jake Morrison's surgery, the media circus outside had only intensified. News vans lined the street, reporters attempted to interview anyone entering or leaving the hospital, and social media buzzed with heated debates about Dr. Sarah Mitchell's decision to save the life of a suspected cop killer. Sarah arrived for her shift to find additional security measures in place. Metal detectors had been installed at all entrances, and guards checked identification more thoroughly than usual. The normally bustling hospital felt tense, with staff speaking in hushed tones and visitors being escorted more carefully than before. Morrison remained unconscious but stable. The surgery had been successful, and his body was healing remarkably well. Blood work showed improving liver function, and there were no signs of infection. From a purely medical standpoint, the case was progressing exactly as Sarah had hoped. But the atmosphere surrounding his care had become increasingly charged. Dr. Mitchell, Nurse Walsh approached her with a concerned expression. "There's been a development. Morrison's motorcycle club members have been gathering outside. Hospital security is watching them, but they're not doing anything illegal. They're just waiting." Sarah looked out the window and saw approximately a dozen motorcycles parked across the street from the hospital. Men in leather jackets bearing Iron Wolves patches stood in small groups, some smoking cigarettes, others talking quietly among themselves. Their presence added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. "Have they tried to contact anyone about visiting Morrison?" Sarah asked. "Not yet, but Administrator Chen wants to meet with you about establishing visitor protocols. There are concerns about security if club members try to see him." The meeting in Chen's office included Detective Coleman, FBI Agent Torres, and a new face, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a medical ethicist from the State University. Chen had apparently called her in to help navigate the unprecedented situation. "Dr. Mitchell," Chen began, "we need to establish clear policies about Mr. Morrison's care and any potential visitors. The situation outside has everyone concerned about security." Dr. Warren spoke up. "From an ethical standpoint, patients have rights to reasonable visitation, regardless of their associations. However, given the security concerns and the ongoing investigation, we need to balance those rights with public safety." Agent Torres was less diplomatic. "Those men outside are dangerous criminals. Allowing them access to Morrison could compromise our investigation and put hospital staff at risk. Some of them are suspected of violent crimes." Sarah felt caught between competing interests. As Morrison's doctor, she knew that emotional support from family and friends could aid in recovery. But she also understood the legitimate security concerns raised by law enforcement. "What if we limit visits to immediate family members only?" Sarah suggested. "With appropriate security present and strict time limits." Morrison has no wife or children that we know of, Detective Coleman said. His parents died several years ago. The closest thing he has to family is the motorcycle club. Dr. Warren nodded thoughtfully. The definition of family in medical contexts has evolved to include chosen family and close personal relationships. If the motorcycle club members are his primary social support system, completely denying access could be seen as discriminatory. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with various proposals being debated. Finally, they agreed on a compromise. Morrison would be allowed one visitor at a time, for no more than 30 minutes, with security present and subject to police approval of the individual visitor. As Sarah returned to the ICU, she was surprised to find Morrison awake. His eyes were open, though still cloudy from medication and trauma. It was the first time he had regained consciousness since the accident, and his awakening represented a significant milestone in his recovery. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah said softly, approaching his bedside. "I'm Dr. Mitchell. You were in a motorcycle accident 3 days ago. You're in the hospital, and you're going to be okay." Morrison tried to speak but couldn't manage more than a whisper due to the breathing tube that had been removed only hours earlier. Sarah explained his injuries and the surgery, keeping her tone professional and reassuring. "Your friends are outside," she added carefully. "They've been waiting for you to wake up." Morrison's eyes showed a flicker of awareness at this information. Despite his weakened condition, he managed to mouth the word brotherhood. Over the next several hours, Morrison's condition continued to improve. He was able to speak in short sentences, though he remained very weak. Sarah was pleased with his medical progress, but she knew that his awakening would intensify the already complex situation surrounding his care. Word of Morrison's consciousness spread quickly through the hospital and beyond. Within an hour, Sarah noticed increased police presence in the ICU, and Administrator Chen informed her that the district attorney's office was requesting immediate access to question Morrison about Officer Torres's murder. "He's not medically ready for intensive questioning," Sarah told Chen firmly. "He just regained consciousness and is still recovering from major trauma. Any interrogation would need to be brief and conducted with medical supervision." This led to another meeting, this time including Morrison's court-appointed attorney, who had been notified of his client's awakening. The lawyer, David Harrison, was a public defender with extensive experience in criminal cases involving motorcycle clubs. "My client has constitutional rights that don't disappear because he's in a hospital bed," Harrison stated firmly. "Any questioning must be conducted with me present, and Dr. Mitchell is correct that his medical condition limits what's appropriate right now." District Attorney Hayes arrived an hour later, clearly frustrated by the delays. "This man is suspected of murdering a police officer. Every moment we delay questioning him is another moment that evidence could be compromised or witnesses could be intimidated." The legal and medical teams worked out another compromise. Morrison could be questioned for no more than 15 minutes at a time, with breaks of at least 2 hours between sessions, and only if Dr. Mitchell certified that he was medically stable enough to participate. The first questioning session was scheduled for the following morning, but before it could take place, an unexpected development changed everything. Morrison's motorcycle club had retained a private attorney, Marcus Webb, one of the most expensive and skilled defense lawyers in the state. Webb's arrival at the hospital caused a stir among law enforcement. His presence suggested that the Iron Wolves had significant resources and were taking Morrison's case very seriously. It also meant that the questioning process would become much more complex and adversarial. "My client will cooperate with law enforcement within reason," Webb announced in a press conference outside the hospital. "But we will not allow his medical recovery to be compromised by overzealous prosecution tactics. Dr. Mitchell has provided exemplary medical care, and we support her decisions regarding her patient's well-being." Sarah watched the press conference from the hospital break room, feeling uncomfortable about being mentioned in the legal proceedings. She had tried to remain focused solely on medical care, but the case was becoming increasingly public and political. That evening, Morrison received his first visitor, Thomas Tank Rodriguez, who appeared to be a high-ranking member of the Iron Wolves. The visit was conducted under heavy security, with police officers present and hospital security monitoring carefully. Sarah observed the interaction from a distance. Rodriguez was a large man with numerous tattoos and a gruff appearance, but his behavior with Morrison was gentle and concerned. He spoke quietly with the patient, asking about his pain levels and recovery, showing genuine care for his friend's well-being. "Doc," Rodriguez approached Sarah after his visit, "I want to thank you for saving Jake's life. I know there's been a lot of pressure on you, and I know people are saying things about him and about us. But Jake's a good man who's made some bad choices. He doesn't deserve to die for those choices." Sarah was struck by Rodriguez's sincerity. Whatever Morrison's legal troubles, it was clear that he had people who cared about him and viewed him as more than just a criminal suspect. After Rodriguez left, Sarah spent time with Morrison discussing his recovery and pain management. Despite everything she had heard about him, she found him to be a cooperative patient who seemed genuinely grateful for the medical care he had received. "Dr. Mitchell," Morrison said quietly, "I know who you are and what people are saying about you helping me. I want you to know that I appreciate what you did. You didn't have to fight for my life, but you did." "It's what any doctor would do," Sarah replied, though she knew that wasn't entirely true given the circumstances. "No," Morrison said, "it's what a good doctor would do. There's a difference." That night, Sarah went home feeling conflicted about the case. Morrison was recovering well medically, but the legal and social implications of his survival continued to create challenges for everyone involved. She had received hate mail from some community members who viewed her as protecting a cop killer, but she had also received support from medical colleagues who praised her ethical stance. Her children had indeed heard about the case at school, and her teenage daughter Emma had asked pointed questions about why she had chosen to help someone who might have killed a police officer. "Mom, I understand that you had to help him because you're a doctor," Emma said over dinner. "But don't you feel bad that the police officer's family might not get justice now?" Sarah struggled to explain the complexity of medical ethics to her daughter. "Sweetheart, my job is to save lives, not to decide who deserves to live or die based on what they might have done. If doctors started making those kinds of judgments, it would be a very dangerous precedent." "But what if he really did kill that policeman? Doesn't that matter?" "It matters to the legal system, and they'll determine his guilt or innocence. My job is just to provide medical care. I have to trust that the system will work the way it's supposed to." Even as she said the words, Sarah wasn't entirely sure she believed them. The case had shown her how complicated the intersection of medicine, law, and justice could be. Her decision to save Morrison's life had been medically and ethically correct, but the broader implications continued to challenge her understanding of her role as a physician in society. As Morrison's recovery progressed, Sarah knew that the most difficult challenges were still ahead. His awakening had only intensified the legal and political battles surrounding his case, and she remained at the center of a controversy that showed no signs of abating. The question of whether she had done the right thing would ultimately be answered not just by Morrison's medical recovery, but by the complex chain of events that his survival had set in motion. 2 weeks after Jake Morrison's surgery, the situation at St. Mary's Hospital had evolved into something nobody could have predicted. Morrison's recovery had been remarkable, faster than Sarah had dared hope, but his improving health had triggered a series of events that would test everyone involved in ways they never imagined. The first shock came during Morrison's formal police interview. With his attorney Marcus Webb present and Dr. Sarah Mitchell monitoring his medical condition, Morrison made a statement that stunned everyone in the room. Rather than denying involvement in Officer David Torres's death, he provided detailed information about the crime, but not in the way anyone expected. "I was there the night Officer Torres was killed," Morrison said, his voice still weak but clear. "But I didn't kill him. I saw who did." Detective Coleman leaned forward, hardly believing what he was hearing. For months, law enforcement had been trying to build a case against Morrison based on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Now he was offering to cooperate. "Jake Morrison has critical information about a conspiracy that goes much deeper than anyone realized," Attorney Webb explained. "My client is willing to provide full cooperation in exchange for protection and consideration in his own legal matters." What emerged over the following days shook the foundation of the investigation. Morrison revealed that Officer Torres had not been killed by the Iron Wolves as everyone had assumed. Instead, he had been murdered by a corrupt network of police officers and city officials who were involved in drug trafficking and had discovered that Torres was close to exposing them. Torres was getting too close to the truth, Morrison explained in a subsequent interview. He was an honest cop in a dirty system, and they couldn't let him live. The Iron Wolves were supposed to be the perfect scapegoats. Everyone would believe we killed a cop. FBI agent Marcus Torres, Officer Torres's brother, sat in stunned silence as Morrison detailed how his brother had been lured to a fake emergency call and, then, executed by people he trusted. The Real killers had planted evidence to implicate the motorcycle club, knowing that public hatred for the Iron Wolves would ensure a swift prosecution. Morrison had witnessed the murder while conducting legitimate business nearby. The Iron Wolves, despite their reputation, operated several legal enterprises including auto repair and transportation services. He had seen corrupt officers plant evidence at the scene and had been fleeing when his motorcycle accident occurred. "Why didn't you come forward immediately?" Agent Torres asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Who would have believed me?" Morrison replied, "I'm a member of a motorcycle club with a criminal reputation. They were police officers. My word against theirs would have been worthless, and I would have ended up dead just like your brother." The revelation sent shockwaves through the police department and city government. Internal Affairs launched an immediate investigation, and several officers were placed on administrative leave pending review of Morrison's allegations. The evidence he provided, including photographs taken with his phone and documentation of suspicious activities, corroborated his claims. Dr. Sarah Mitchell found herself at the center of an even more complex situation. Her decision to save Morrison's life had not only preserved an innocent man but had also exposed a conspiracy that might never have been uncovered otherwise. The man she had treated despite enormous pressure was now helping to bring real justice for Officer Torres's death. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had made a different choice that night," Sarah confided to Dr. Henderson during a quiet moment in the hospital break room. "If Morrison had died, the Real killers would have gotten away with murder." Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "You made the right decision for the right reasons, Sarah. The fact that it led to a larger truth is just confirmation that maintaining our ethical standards, even under pressure, serves the greater good." The media narrative surrounding the case underwent a dramatic shift. Where Sarah had previously been criticized by some for saving a suspected cop killer, she was now being hailed as the doctor whose ethical courage had led to justice for Officer Torres. The irony was not lost on her. The same decision was now being praised that had been condemned just weeks earlier. Morrison's cooperation with authorities revealed a web of corruption involving drug trafficking, money laundering, and several unsolved crimes. City Councilman Richard Palmer and Police Captain Frank Morrison, no relation to Jake, were among those arrested as the investigation expanded. The scandal reached the highest levels of city government and law enforcement. For Morrison himself, his cooperation resulted in immunity from prosecution for any crimes related to Officer Torres's death, which he had not committed anyway. However, he still faced charges for some of the Iron Wolves' other activities, though his attorney was negotiating plea agreements based on his continued cooperation. "Doc, I owe you my life," Morrison told Sarah during one of his final days in the hospital. "But, it's more than that. You gave me the chance to do something right. I've made mistakes in my life, but helping catch my brother's real killers feels like maybe I can start to balance the scales." Sarah was touched by his words but remained focused on his medical recovery. "Just concentrate on getting healthy, Jake. The legal matters will sort themselves out." The Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club also underwent scrutiny as part of the investigation, but the revelations about police corruption had shifted public perception. While the club had certainly been involved in illegal activities, they were no longer viewed as the primary threat to community safety. Several club members, including Thomas Rodriguez, had provided valuable information to investigators. One of the most dramatic moments came when FBI agent Marcus Torres publicly apologized to Morrison and the Iron Wolves for the assumptions that had been made about their involvement in his brother's death. "I let my grief cloud my judgment," Torres said in a press conference. "I wanted someone to blame for my brother's death, and it was easier to blame people everyone already distrusted rather than consider that the corruption might be coming from within our own institutions." The case had profound implications for how law enforcement and the medical community viewed their roles in society. Medical professionals across the country followed the story, and Dr. Sarah Mitchell became something of a symbol for maintaining ethical standards under pressure. The American Medical Association invited Sarah to speak at their annual conference about medical ethics in complex situations. Medical schools began using her case as a teaching example of how physicians must remain committed to their oath to do no harm regardless of external pressures. The moment we start making medical decisions based on legal or political considerations rather than patient need, we compromise the fundamental trust that society places in physicians, Sarah told an audience of medical students. Every patient deserves our best care, regardless of who they are or what they might have done. But, the case also highlighted the complexity of justice in modern society. Morrison's survival and cooperation had led to the arrest of the Rael killers, but it had also exposed how quickly public opinion and even professional judgment could be influenced by assumptions and biases. Detective Coleman, who had initially pressured Sarah to let Morrison die, became one of her strongest supporters. Dr. Mitchell showed more integrity in one night than I showed in months of investigation, he admitted publicly. Her commitment to doing what was right, rather than what was popular, led to real justice. The corrupt officers were eventually convicted of Officer Torres's murder and numerous other crimes. The investigation Morrison's testimony triggered led to the prosecution of over a dozen corrupt officials and the implementation of new oversight measures in the police department and city government. Morrison himself served a reduced sentence for his other crimes and was released after 18 months. Upon his release, he left the Iron Wolves and started a motorcycle safety foundation in honor of Officer Torres. His near-death experience and the opportunity to help solve his murder had genuinely changed his perspective on life. Dr. Mitchell didn't just save my life that night, Morrison said in an interview years later. She saved my soul. By treating me like a human being worthy of care, even when everyone else saw me as a monster, she helped me remember that I could be better than my worst moments. The relationship between the Iron Wolves and local law enforcement improved dramatically as a result of the case. The club cooperated with police in several subsequent investigations, and several members became advocates for criminal justice reform and police accountability. For Sarah, the case remained a defining moment in her career. She continued working at St. Mary's Hospital, eventually becoming chief of emergency medicine. She never regretted her decision to operate on Morrison, and the positive outcome reinforced her belief in the importance of medical ethics. I learned that doing the right thing isn't always immediately rewarded, Sarah reflected years later. Sometimes you face criticism and pressure for maintaining your principles. But if you stay true to what you know is right, eventually the truth emerges. The case also strengthened her relationship with her children, particularly her daughter Emma, who came to understand the courage it took to stand by her principles in the face of community pressure. My mom taught me that doing what's right isn't about what's popular or easy, Emma said in a school essay about her mother. It's about staying true to your values even when everyone is telling you you're wrong. The story of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's decision to save Jake Morrison became a landmark case in medical ethics, legal justice, and community healing. It demonstrated how one person's commitment to doing what was right, regardless of external pressure, could have far-reaching positive consequences that no one could have anticipated. In the end, the motorcycle accident that nearly killed Jake Morrison and the doctor's controversial decision to save his life had exposed a web of corruption, brought justice to a fallen officer's family, and reinforced the importance of maintaining ethical principles even in the most challenging circumstances. The event outside the hospital that night, Sarah's decision to prioritize human life over political pressure, had indeed left everyone speechless, but ultimately for all the right reasons.